So I think we might begin. So Lou, can I hand over? Thank you.
Opening prayers, taking refuge in generating bodhicitta. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create to listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create to listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create to listening to the Dhamma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit migrating beings. Abandon evil doing, practice virtue well, subdue your mind. This is the Buddha's teaching. Like a star, an optical illusion, or a flame, a magical illusion, a dewdrop or a bubble, like a dream, a flash of lightning or a cloud, so should one consider all compounded things. By this merit may we attain omniscience and overcome our enemy, our harmful deeds, and may beings buffeted by the waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death be liberated from the ocean of existence. The Heart of Perfection of Wisdom Sutra. I prostrate to the Arya Triple Gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on massive Vulture's Mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in a concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aryavalokitesvara looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, beheld those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Then, through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aryavalokitesvara: how should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that, and the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aryavalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Shariputra: Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter lineage wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly, beholding those five aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty. Emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form is also not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased, stainless, not without stain, not deficient, not fulfilled. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind. No visual form, no sound, no odor, no touch, no taste, no object of touch, and no phenomenon. There is no I element, and so on up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance, and so on up to and including no aging and death and no extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering, origination, cessation, and path. There is no exalted wisdom, no attainment, and also no non-attainment. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the endpoint of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times also manifestly completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment and reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled mantra, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth since it's not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Tayata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi soha. Shariputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, should train the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then a Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Aryavalokitesvara, saying, Well said, son of the lineage. It is like that, it is like that. Once you practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated, even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan having thus spoken, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Balikicesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praised, thus spoken by the Bhagavan. The praise to Manjushri. Homage to my Guru and protector Manjushri, who holds to his heart a scriptural text, symbolic of his seeing of all things as they are, whose understanding shines forth as the sun, undiluted by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of a father for his only son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance, overwhelmed by their suffering. You whose dragon thunder-like proclamation of Dharma arouses us from the stupor of our delusions and frees us from the iron chains of our karma, who wields the sword of wisdom, hewing down suffering wherever its sprouts appear, clearing away the darkness of all ignorance, you whose princely body is adorned with the 112 marks of a Buddha, who has completed the 10 stages, achieving the highest perfections of a Bodhisattva, who has been pure from the beginning. I bow down to you, Manjushri. Om Rapatsanadi, with the brilliance of your wisdom, O compassionate one, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so I may gain insight. I may gain insight into the Buddha's words and the texts that explain them. The other mandala. By the virtue of offering to you assembly of Buddhas, visualize before me this mandala, built on a base resplendent with flowers, saffron water, and incense, adorned with Mount Meru and the 4 continents, as well as the sun and the moon. May all sentient beings share in its good effects. In a mandala, please enjoy and bless me and all sentient beings, be released from the 3 poisonous minds. For I am offering without attachment my body, enemies, friends, and strangers, and all possessions which are the objects of my greed, ignorance, and hatred. Mandala offering for requesting teachings, O holy and venerable Lama, from the clouds of compassion that form in the skies of your Dharmakaya wisdom, please release a rain of vast and profound Dharma, precisely in accordance with the needs of those to be trained. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Neyatayami. I send forth this jeweled mandala to you, precious Gurus.
Thank you very much. So welcome, everyone. We'll just take a few moments drawing our mind in and setting a motivation for the session. Just thinking how rare it is, even in this world at large, to have even a few moments of tranquil peacefulness in which to investigate and become more deeply acquainted with our own minds. This is a great privilege. So from the very depths of our heart, turn ourselves around to consider others without exception, and feel that by spending this time together, investigating, as we're going to be doing, the 6 perfections, which are the actual practice of the Bodhisattva, enabling full enlightenment to be achieved, we'll be able to sow the seeds of traversing this same path, just as the Buddha has done. I'm also conscious that today is the day before the anniversary of the passing of Kabje Zopa Rinpoche. I was actually teaching on that day last year, or the day after last year. And of course it came as an incredible shock. But it also became the perfect teaching on death and impermanence. There is no time other than now to start setting towards the Bodhisattva's goal. Our wish to do this will give Rinpoche the greatest pleasure, both now and in the future, when we have the opportunity to be with him again through the fervent force of our prayers. So we'll now begin the session in terms of the looking at Shantideva's wonderful verses. And there's a beautiful organic coherency to the verses we're going to be. I mean, they're always coherent, but this particular set of verses is covering in a very concise form the 6 perfections. So they're uniquely precious for that reason. So last week we were already exploring how generosity depends upon the mind. And I'll just recap. This involved 2 subheadings. Completing the perfection of generosity does not depend on eliminating the poverty of all migrators. And the second subheading, it is perfected through my acquaintance, our acquaintance with the mind of giving. This is critical. So the first subheading referred to verse 9, which read, if the perfection of generosity were the alleviation of the world's poverty, then since sentient beings are still starving now, in what manner did the previous Buddhas perfect it? This verse raised a fundamental query. If the perfection of generosity did depend on eliminating the poverty of not just some, I mean, the ones that we've actually got to give something to in this lifetime, but all transmigrators without exception, then how come poverty hasn't been totally overcome? And how could even a Buddha be said, therefore, to have attained the perfection of generosity? So the second subheading, it is perfected through the acquaintance with the mind of giving, refers to verse 10, which effectively answers our query. The perfection of generosity is said to be the thought, note, thought, is said to be the thought to give all beings everything, together with the fruit of such a thought. Hence, it is simply a state of mind. And I quoted Tsongkhapa's gloss on these verses, and I'll do so again today. It's always such a delight to be in contact with Tsongkhapa's texts. They speak directly to you. Therefore, the physical and verbal aspects of generosity are not the main thing. The main thing is the mental aspect. This is because you perfect generosity after you destroy, this is a bit that I really want to zoom in on, after you destroy your stingy clinging to all that you own, your body, resources, and roots of virtue, and you completely condition your mind to giving them away to living beings from the depths of your heart. And not only that, but also giving to others the effects of this giving as well. So some Tsongkhapa say we don't even try to keep the benefits of having given for us that have accrued for ourselves. We give them away completely as well, as referring to giving away our merits. So I think it's very inspiring that we're currently positioned, I'm talking about us, to examine the meaning of these very same verses ourselves. Though Tsongkhapa was composing his precious texts in the 14th and 15th centuries, and Shantideva some 6 centuries earlier again, we are now studying them in 2024, thus many centuries later. And there is no doubt as to the unavoidable relevancy and immediacy of these deep reflections on what generosity actually consists of, what it might actually mean. But regarding the query Shantideva has just raised, you might be left wondering that if the perfection of generosity is just simply the state of mind wishing to give, then why should the physical and verbal aspects of generosity be pertinent or necessary at all? This is, I suggest, a somewhat scurrilous thought, in that it proposes that it is not necessary, say, to give, for example, material things or kind words, such as Dharma advice, at all. One can simply sit and meditate on the mind of generosity. You see the problem here? If it's just simply the mind that's intent to give, then do we need to bother to give at all? So this is not the point of Shantideva's claim. I've got a leaf blower going on right outside my window, so I hope it's not disturbing me too much. What is required then, says Tsongkhapa, is that you not only clear away stinginess's tight-fistedness, which prevents giving things away, but also that you develop from the depths of your heart the intention to give to others all your possessions. And as I'm quoting again, for this, you have to meditate on the faults of holding onto things and the benefits of giving them away. So in the Bodhisattva levels, a Sangha says, what is the nature of generosity? It is the intention accompanying Bodhisattvas' disinterested non-attachment to all their possessions and their body. And motivated by this, the physical and verbal actions of giving the things to be given. Hence, says a Sangha, it is the virtue of a generous attitude and the physical and verbal actions which are motivated by this. We can see here that we've captured the motivation to actually give as well. Sangha continues, it's therefore clear that physical and verbal actions informed and motivated by generosity will naturally flow forth upon our overcoming self-interest and personal attachment to things. Indeed, we might say, during the end of Sangha's quote, we might say that the only reliable indication that our stinginess's tight-fistedness has indeed been loosened is that incumbent upon our cultivation of a deep and genuine mental state of generosity, we are sufficiently free, or rather freed, to give, and therefore can immediately see how to actually give things away in the forms of the three kinds of gifts. And so in the Lam Rim, we find the presentation of perfection of generosity, enumerating the three as the gift of the teachings. This is the most precious gift, of course, because it enables beings to be relieved of suffering, both temporally and ultimately. The gift of fearlessness and of material gifts. The gift of fearlessness is an absolutely fascinating one to consider, because does anyone know what it refers to, by the way? Can anyone give me an example of performing the gift of fearlessness? It is giving the gift of life or safety to another being whose life is threatened or damaged in some way. So deciding to rescue an animal that has been swept away in a flood is an act of generosity, because you're giving them the most precious thing that they can hold, which is their own life. This is quite a remarkable thing to consider. So it's therefore very powerful when we go about our daily affairs to spot opportunities where we can practice these three kinds of generosity in relation to the three objects. And when the lamas give commentary on these, that they don't refer to the gift of the teachings as sort of reading out of a Dharma text like I'm doing today to a large extent, or quoting obvious words of Dharma. They just mean to be giving words to people that are going to be encouraging and beneficial. This is our Dharma practice. Because there is no tinge of selfishness or desirous attachment from our side, this is the goal, the model, we are able to give these things without the slightest restraint or hesitation. And because we're not looking through the lens of self-cherishing and self-grasping, we can also give with skill and precision exactly what is needed. Because we're not focusing on those acts in terms of my own well-being or what I need, but in terms of what other beings need. And because of that incredible focus, we're able to judge exactly what to do, what to give. We're no longer having to come up against this bulwark of opposition or obstacle building from our self-cherishing side. He says, I'm prepared to give, but I'll give only so much so that I don't feel somehow deluded or stripped away or insecure for that matter. So again, the lamas will often advise that this doesn't mean you have to go and sell your house and give your money to charity, but it's necessary to practice giving as much as we can and to lift the ante as we go. So if you find we can give one chocolate, then the next day we find we can give two, and so forth. So we sort of try to stretch the envelope. So do we even know what such freedom to give would feel like? And how joyous it would be to be able to give with such effortless abandon, if you like. Last week, I also shared a quote from Tsongkhapa, who was quoting himself from the Compendium of the Perfections, which contained two particularly powerful verses, which I'd like to quote again, because they exemplify the kind of structure of generosity that we're talking about. If you see the impermanence of resources and naturally have great compassion, you will know with good reason that the gifts you have kept in your house belong to others. There, second verse, there is never fear from what has been given away. What is kept at home gives rise to fears. That it is insufficient, ordinary, or needing constant protection. If you give it away, these faults never harm you. So, of course, in this quote from the Compendium of the Perfections, we're talking about home. We don't want to take that absolutely literally. We're talking about the in-home making, if you like, the best domicile building that we do all the time around our egotistical needs. They're our home. That's the space in which we're choosing to dwell and feel safe in, according to the self-cherishing attitude. So it's holding on to this at all costs that's going to be the source of fear and anxiety, as is being suggested. So it's fascinating, I think, to consider how giving without constraint can be seen as a form of fearlessness. So in terms of ourselves, we must determine whether the thought of giving things we own away gives rise to fear or to joy. Fear that if we do give things away, we'll be left with nothing for ourselves, or joy that if we give things away, others will benefit in appropriate and wonderful ways. So clearly, Considerable nuance is required to interpret how such close-fistedness might be regarded as a form of anxiety, fear, or panic. That is why we initially decided to give a whole box of chocolates, but then on second thoughts decided to only give half or to give one away. This is because we were reserving something for the safety of ourselves. And this self that we're preserving is the tight-fisted, self-cherishing self that can't bear the idea of not being in full control, in full appetitive consumption of whatever it needs from the universe to feed itself. So in his presentation on how to give away material things, Tsongkhapa presents 4 outlines, and I'm just going to touch on these by enumerating them. The recipients of giving, the motivation for giving, how to give, and the things to give. But today I only want to comment on the first, motivation, as it directly concerns how we are to shape the very best motivation for giving, that is, the whole box of chocolates away. That can be subdivided, this motivation, into a focus on the purpose of giving, which thinks, I will complete the perfection of generosity, a precondition for unexcelled enlightenment. So we meditate or contemplate the purpose of giving in this vast, expansive way. We focus on the thing to be given, which thinks, these are Tsongkhapa's sort of thoughts being ventriloquized for our advantage. We think from the outset of a bodhisattva, a bodhisattva gives away all possessions to living beings. So the material goods that I am giving belong to others. And it is as if I had been keeping them in trust. Isn't it a remarkable idea? And the third is a focus on the recipient, which thinks, since these recipients, whether asking for the gift or not, bring to completion my perfection of generosity, they are my teachers. This again is absolutely remarkable to consider. The very fact that we see someone, discern a need, and motivate to give means that in that situation, that manifestation of the recipient has invoked our act of generosity, which takes us one step closer to enlightenment. And therefore, that person is inseparable from our spiritual teacher, who's doing exactly the same thing. So clearly, this is very, very significant advice. It's not so easy to put into practice, but the advice is there and the challenge is there. Thinking of the objects, for example, of our generosity, not as passive, and when I say objects of our generosity, I'm talking about the recipients, thinking of them not as passive vessels or even pathetic recipients of our magnificent kindness, or even as the abject objects of our pity, but rather as our esteemed teachers, is an astonishingly radical and profoundly transformative strategic maneuver. So I don't mean maneuver here as somehow tricky or clever, overly clever, ingenious or whatever. Rather, it is an insight, one that's capable of overhauling our habitual attitude that builds out my superiority, my worth, even my condescension towards those who I consider less than me into a kind of mass that is highly immovable, highly difficult to work with. So how do we cut through that? I'm thinking here, when I mention the word condescension, that so often our thoughts of charity, for example, we use the word charity, it's so quickly tied up, when we consider it, with acts of kindness that have been calculated to repay or benefit me. And the obvious one, of course, is the giant check for $1 million held up by the CEO of a major multinational corporation that sells products, who wants to aggrandize their brand name as somehow benevolent in order to sell more products and make more money. And that's why they've got the giant check. Why not just send the $1 million to people who need it? I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying it's fascinating. So I would suggest that we can do exactly the same thing on a kind of micro personal level of needing to hold up our own little $1 million check every time we give and somehow get rewarded or patted on the back. This is not what's involved at all here. So, in other words, a bodhisattva's giving must be understood to be immune to any desirous attachment to attain things for ourselves. I'm using desirous attachment very carefully there. In his compendium of sutras, Shantideva, the compendium of sutras is this is a remarkable book. It's the other sort of great text of Shantideva, and it is a compilation of sutra quotations that in many ways runs parallel to Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. In fact, it shows you from where Shantideva has drawn the content that he has synthesized in his own remarkable verses. So it's really exciting and fascinating to visit this book while contemplating Shantideva's verses. So Shantideva quotes from the Ganga Sutra, Ganga Sutra. It says, how is it that bodhisattvas are free from attachment to getting things? Noble sir, when bodhisattvas receive things, they do not think of them as their own, are not greedy for them, do not hoard them. At the proper time, they give them away to religious wanderers and Brahmin, to their parents, friends, counselors, acquaintances, and family members. At the proper time, they consume these things themselves, but do so with no attraction, wholly unattached. And while they do not get anything, they have no distressed thoughts about getting things and are not tormented. They do not arouse distrustful thoughts towards donors and patrons. And further, quote, that is, they give gifts that are pure, gifts that are free from any sense of self. They give gifts that are pure, free from any sense of mind. They give gifts that are free and pure from ulterior motives. They give gifts that are pure and free from false views. They give gifts that are pure, free from signs. They give gifts that are pure, free from distinctions. They give gifts that are pure, free from any hope for results. They give gifts that are equal and pure like the sky. Just as space has no limits, they give gifts with no limits in their mind. Just as space is vast and has no distortions, they give gifts and dedicate the goodness to awakening. Bodhisattvas give gifts that have the distinguishing characteristics of illusion and have no intrinsic nature whatsoever. And a little further on, noble sir, a bodhisattva gives generosity in this way, gives up all the reactive emotions of sentient beings through the pristine awareness of wisdom. And though through the pristine awareness of skillful means, not giving up on sentient beings, has generosity that is just like space. So these are remarkable passages, you'll agree. So you'll note here that this capability of giving with no limits in their mind is contingent upon a realization of emptiness, and that the space-like perfection of generosity should be indistinguishable from not giving up on sentient beings requires we radically overhaul what we might mean by generosity, especially when viewed through the cloudy lens of erroneous views of both self and phenomena. So what we're getting at there is that unless we've penetrated to the actual mode of existence of ourselves, how the I exists, and realize our emptiness of existing from our own side, we're going to be incapable of giving as though limitless like space, because we're still going to be constrained by false views of self. And the other aspect of the quotes is that we also need to combine it with excellent skillful means, which is actually going to accomplish the benefit of, that we're aiming to offer others. So note that the reactive emotions here is just another translation of the afflictions. So as long as the afflictions are in play, it's obvious that our capacity to give is going to be constrained. So we naturally lead now on to the perfection of ethics or morality. Shantideva's point here is that morality, just like generosity, depends upon the mind. This becomes immediately clear when we appreciate that morality here is defined in the sutras as, quote, the decision to refrain from harming others, end of quote. So it is therefore to be distinguished, demarcated from, away from, a mind that simply does not harm others because the conditions or opportunity to harm are not present in that particular situation or that particular moment. So we're going to be looking at that a little bit more, but this is a very, very important point to consider. Anyone can have the apparent ethics of non-harming when there's no one there that would be able to harm. But it's another question, what happens when there is an object there? Likewise, with restraint, it proposes that we hold back or pull back from a burgeoning emotional impulse that might otherwise come into full play. We're about to plunge forward, perhaps into a violent attack on someone, for example, but at the last minute decide to pull back. So this is sort of dynamic restraint in an emergency situation. But a bodhisattva's training is to saturate their mind with this restraint so that it covers the full expanse of their mind, so that no matter what situation they encounter, it won't have the triggering capacity to cause an impulse to harm or to set off the flare of one of the afflictions. That's all very well to talk about these things, but we know it's very difficult to do in practice. But that's why we're talking about the perfection of ethics, because then we have a clear idea of what an actual, genuine, pure practice of ethics would be, what it would look like. So this is what's meant by the conduct of restraint. And Shantideva gives in his verse the act of killing. So we decide, for example, not to cast the fishing line, or grab our knife, or pull the trigger, or even to imagine doing so. And at the same time, we mentally resolve not to allow ourselves such harmful, killing thoughts in the future. So the logic here echoes that of the previous stanzas. And that's clarified by Sabje's commentary on these verses, falling under two subheadings again, which I now will read. Completing the morality gone beyond, referring to the perfection, does not depend on the absence of sentient beings that one could kill. And secondly, it is completed by acquainting the mind of abandoning. So the logic here, as I've just mentioned, does echo the verses on generosity. Just as the perfection of generosity doesn't require that all beings are satiated or become satiated with everything they need, likewise, the perfection of ethics does not require that all beings have been rescued and saved from harmful intent, especially our own. Rather, its meaning is that we have mentally resolved not to kill others, even at the cost of our lives. That's our restraint. So the first part of the explanation concerns the first two lines of verse 11, which read, "Nowhere has the killing of fish and other creatures been eradicated." Sabje, in his commentary, gives the reason. Because, he says, it is unfeasible to move all the animals, such as fish and so forth, to a safe place. This can't be done. Additionally, even if one did or could do that, who would there be to stand guard over those rescued creatures so that harm couldn't befall them again in the future? So rather, the perfection of ethics or morality involves acquainting our mind with the thought that abandons intent to perform such non-virtuous deeds, such as killing, stealing, and so forth. Such restraint in and of itself constitutes a virtuous deed, as it is a cessation of harmful intent for at least as long as we have that dynamic restraint in play. This is also something very, very powerful to contemplate. In our cases, because we're perhaps not yet qualified Bodhisattvas, we could say that such restraint is pertinent and necessary in a more or less continuous fashion because we harbour a capacity to kill under the duress of an afflicted mind that might at any moment arise due to even a very small or trivial incident. And in saying this, I recall a very recent article in it was the Washington Post about another American shooting, and this time a person was shot in a Walmart queue waiting, to be served, because they had apparently stepped too close to someone else in that queue. That person turned around and shot them dead on the spot. So this is, I just couldn't help throw this in. This is the tyranny of American gun laws. It arms the afflictions with a readily accessible killing tool. It only takes a small impulse of rage. You've got the gun already, so you raise it and you shoot. And so that whole scenario is a problem because it sets up the conditions for the ripening of that afflicted mind in this very destructive way. So just feeling satisfaction that one has the bulge of a handgun in one's purse or in one's pocket is problematic from a bodhisattva's perspective, because it sort of implies that given a certain situation where we feel we're being harmed, we'll have the intent and right to use it. So I'm using that allegorically, by the way. I'm not pointing my fingers at America. I'm using it as a metaphor for what we're all doing all the time. It can be with a single word, of course, as well. So we must understand, in other words, there's a critical difference between not killing merely because the triggering of conditions, forgive the pun, enabling killing to occur are not currently assembled in that place, such as there's no one present to kill, and making the commitment, on the other hand, the conscious resolve not to kill under any circumstances, at least for the duration of a day or an hour or a week or a month or a year or a lifetime. So even in the chronologically limited example of a day, I decided not to kill for a day, it said that the meritorious result of that resolve not to kill for that duration of time will accrue the merits of not killing over that expanse of time. Even if there's no one there suitable to kill, of course, there's no one suitable to kill, but I'm just saying, even if there were someone who I might deem with an afflicted mind to be suitable to kill, because I've made that resolve, I am producing positive karma. So this ability to accumulate virtue in a continuous fashion is a featured advantage or an excellence of holding vows and commitments. Regarding the Bodhisattva vows, for example, Sakya Sonam Gyaltsen says, and I quote, "If he has not made a practice of either such things that are causes for relinquishing the vow, then even when he has changed lives, whether because of his inspiration for the welfare of living beings or due to certain karmic conditions, the taking of the vow will not be alienated in whatever destiny he may be reborn in. He will remember it. Even if he forgets upon changing lives, the repeated reception in reliance upon the instruction of a spiritual advisor is not a fresh undertaking, but a healing of memory. I found this an incredibly beautiful and moving passage, because it shows you how, if we undertake the Bodhisattva vows, which include, amongst other things, not killing and not harming others, then even when we die, even if we forget that we've taken Bodhisattva vows in our next life, it will merely be a few words from a spiritual teacher that will ripen our former resolve, and it will be able to be blossomed again as a powerful tool for our spiritual progress. And so this idea that there'll be a healing of memory will actually, any impairment to our memory will be instantly overcome. So we have this opportunity to practice and practice across future lifetimes. So this is a kind of breadth of this idea of restraint here. I'm trying to say what restraint really does mean. It resonates across lifetimes. Likewise, we can protect goodness by dedicating it to awakening so that it cannot be lost. As the Aksayamati Sutra says, as quoted in Shantideva's The Training Anthology again, quote, when wholesome actions are dedicated to awakening, they do not waste away until you sit upon the seat of awakening. As, for example, Reverend Saratvataputta, when a drop of water has fallen into a great ocean, it does not waste away until the end of an eon. So I think it's valuable to consider here that the maintenance of one's bodhisattva vows is itself an example of the first kind of morality, which is the morality of abstaining from vices. The second kind of morality is that of virtue, which is the practice of the six perfections. And the third type of morality is working for sentient beings. So our practice of the six perfections is itself an example of the morality of virtue. Our purpose in pursuing the perfections would be an example of the third, working for the welfare of others as the goal of our practice. And in this way, we can seamlessly see how we can encompass all three moralities in a seamless way, in a coherent way. As Geshe Doga has explained elsewhere in the context of his Succession Yoga commentary, I quote, the first two moralities, those of abstaining from vices and the morality of virtue pertaining to obtaining the purpose for oneself. The morality of working for sentient beings incorporates the purposes of other sentient beings. Alternatively, when we talk about bodhisattva's deeds in terms of ripening one's own continuum, we can talk about bodhisattva deeds in terms of ripening one's own continuum or ripening the continuum of other beings. Considered in this way, the first type of ethical discipline of restraint pertains to the bodhisattva's deeds for fulfilling one's own welfare, of ripening one's own continuum, whereas the other two types of ethical discipline encompass the bodhisattva's deeds for fulfilling the welfare of other beings or ripening the continuum of others. So Geshe Doga concludes, by understanding morality in this concise way, we can perhaps better relate to and effectively apply ourselves to the bodhisattva's practices. In short, when we want to know in what deeds the bodhisattvas engage, we refer to these three moralities. So in this way, we arrive at the last two lines of verse 11, which read, for the attainment of merely the thought to forsake such things is explained as the perfection of moral discipline. So such things, which is sort of an interpolation of Berzin as the translator, but it's very helpful because it's referring to the previous two lines. Such things refers to killing, as specifically mentioned as an example in Shantideva's opening lines. So it is through the achievement of the thought to forsake such things, such acts of killing, for example, together with their injurious motivation, that is the perfection of ethics. Such a comprehensive attitude, such a comprehensive thought is indistinguishable from the Bodhisattva's practice of the Great Way itself. In the Compendium of Sutras, Shantideva quotes from the Inquiry of a Pali Sutra, Here, Pali, if a bodhisattva practicing the great way undergoes a downfall in the morning, but in the afternoon she is not separated from the awakening mind, that bodhisattva's moral discipline is limitless. If she undergoes a downfall in the afternoon, but in the evening she is not separated excuse me, from the awakening mind, the bodhisattva's moral discipline is limitless. And the sutra repeats the same formula, covering every watch of the day and night. And it then concludes, this being so, O Pali, the training of the bodhisattva who is practicing the great way requires careful attention. Here the bodhisattva should not, let's talk about the bodhisattva's practice of ethics. Here the bodhisattva should not develop overwhelming excessive regret or feel excessively guilty. But now, if someone belonging to the way of the disciple undergoes downfalls again and again, the moral discipline of that disciple should be understood to be destroyed. So I think this is necessary to put on the table. We will fall over from time to time, but if we maintain our bodhicitta motivation, we'll be limitlessly able to perform ethical actions and the other perfections without fault. So we haven't lost everything. So in the Lamrim, we find an extensive presentation of these sorts of topics. So I'm not going to attempt to cover them here. But Kunzang Pelden gives an excellent, concise account of these verses in the following way. But more particularly, he gives it as a kind of an overall encapsulation of the entire chapter 5 and says, it is important to understand that mindfulness consists of not forgetting those actions that are to be implemented and those that are to be avoided. Vigilant introspection or inner watchfulness is a repeated examination of all circumstances, is a repeated examination in all circumstances, whether we're alone or in the company of others, of our physical, verbal, and mental behavior, and the conscious implementation of the principle, and this is the crunch, the principle of adopting what is to be done and rejecting what is not to be done. We must first study at the feet of an authentic teacher in order to understand, train ourselves, and become adept in adopting and rejecting. Otherwise, how would we be able to apply it without forgetting? So, of course, the authentic spiritual teacher is none other than Lord Buddha himself. So, as it said, strange it is that many who declare themselves observant do not even know what is to be observed. So this is what has to be observed to learn how to adopt and reject. So in this reference to a teacher too, I thought that it's stressed in the Lamrim that teacher has to be an exemplary example of the practice of ethics. And this is clear from the presentation of the 4 means of gathering disciples. Having called students well with the beckoning of giving, this talking from the perspective of a teacher, I will make talk pleasant to hear, and having become self-composed through behaving with purpose, will offer the great advice of the fulfillment of aims. So having become self-composed through behaving with purpose indicates the composure that springs from pure ethical practice. There mustn't be a disjunct between what a teacher imparts and how they conduct their own affairs. If we notice such a disjunction, we're entitled to consider not to follow that teacher. This is something His Holiness is recommending. Why? Because if their morality is unreliable, even deceptive, we can be led astray, seriously astray. We must also understand, when considered from a Buddhist perspective, that if, in terms of our resolve, we drop to a lower vehicle by generating the wish to become a Hinayana Arhat and not a fully enlightened Buddha, then, as Tsongkhapa puts it, they would destroy their ethical restraint. So this is really important. We have to maintain the height of our ethical restraint within the framework of the Bodhisattva's deeds and goals. And if we allow ourselves to drop down below that, then we can't be said to have maintained our bodhicitta ethical restraint. We've actually allowed it to fall away, to be lost, which of course is a tragic thing. Tsongkhapa says, for if bodhisattvas do not cast aside such restraint, then even were they to indulge in sensory pleasures, they would not destroy the attitude of restraint that is unique to a bodhisattva. So this is really interesting to consider. Shantideva quotes from chapter 3 of Shantideva's text, verse 28, like a blind person finding a jewel in a heap of garbage, by chance the spirit of enlightenment has arisen in me. So Tsongkhapa then advises that we think, how very wonderful that I have attained something like this, and never will I give it up. Devoting particular attention to this, vow, this is Tsongkhapa's words, vow over and over. Not to give it up for even an instant. So I think Stephen isn't here today. He's sent in his apology, but I think it goes some distance to answering Stephen's question from last week. Even when we seem in the depths of despair or are becoming despondent at a lack of apparent progress in our practice, we must keep this very wonderful and particular thought in the forefront of our mind. The thought, how very wonderful that I have attained something like this. Hold it as the most precious thing that you have. So let's conclude this section with Tsongkhapa's definition of the perfection of ethical discipline from the Lam Rim, which is ethical discipline is an attitude of abstention that turns your mind away from harming others and from the sources of such harm. Therefore, you bring about the perfection of ethical discipline by progressively increasing your habituation to this attitude until you reach completion. So what we must take from this definition, I think, is that the task of perfecting ethical discipline is progressive, cumulative, and it's achieved through repeated and increasingly powerful habituation to ethical practice itself. Therefore, when we do fall over, what needs to be done is blatantly obvious. We need to reaffirm reconsolidate why we have undertaken to achieve the great purpose, and then to take the appropriate remedial steps to purify. We must also be clear that in terms of priority, we must develop the strength of our pure ethical discipline. As Tsongkhapa asks us to do. And this is not itself a selfish motivation. Why? Because, as Tsongkhapa indicates, if our own ethical discipline is impure and degenerates, you will fall to a miserable rebirth, and will therefore not even achieve your own welfare, let alone the welfare of others. Tsongkhapa quotes from the Compendium of the Perfections: "Those who strive to endow all beings with the ornament of the perfect Buddha's ethical discipline initially purify their own ethical discipline. With pure ethical discipline, they develop powerful strength." And also, if you cannot achieve your own welfare with faulty ethical discipline, where will you get the strength for the welfare of others? Therefore, those who strive for others' welfare do not relax their devotion for this. So I think this puts it into perspective, doesn't it? If pure ethical discipline is based on the mental practice of knowing what to adopt and what to cast aside, then we must consider how not doing so will have the invariable consequence of injuring not just ourselves, but others. Why? Because we will have hindered, if not fatally injured, our bodhicitta aspiration, and hence our progression on the spiritual path. Our ability to perfectly help others will therefore be frustrated, stalled, impaired, or even utterly destroyed. This is why His Holiness the Dalai Lama calls such self-interest intelligent, because it is healthy and necessary to be concerned about one's own ethical discipline in this way, in terms of oneself. His Holiness: "Now, there is nothing inherently wrong with pursuing one's own interests. On the contrary, to do so is a natural expression of our fundamental disposition to seek happiness, to shun suffering. In fact, it is because we care for our own needs that we have the natural capacity to appreciate others' kindness and love. This instinct for self-interest only becomes negative when we are excessively self-focused. When this happens, our vision narrows, undermining our ability to see things in their wider context. And within such a narrow perspective, even small problems can create tremendous frustration and seem unbearable. In such a state, should genuine major challenges arise, the danger is that we'll lose all hope, feel desperate and alone, and become consumed with self-pity." So the juxtaposition in His Holiness's presentation here between sensible or intelligent self-care and indulging in a self-cherishing attitude is one that we'll find emphasized throughout Shantideva's text, as we'll have multiple opportunities to observe. So we now move to the next section, indeed the next perfection, which is that patience, perfection of patience, depends on the mind. Patience itself is defined as a mind that in the face of harms and sufferings does not become disturbed. When I first heard this definition, I was really, really sort of rattled by it, because from a Western perspective, we see patience as a sort of, I'm just going to somehow remain even-minded and get through everything and not get rattled. So that's kind of common parlance, that's what patient means. But in the Buddhist context, it's referring on a much more subtle level to the very fact that I won't get agitated mentally whatsoever when something opposing or problematic appears to me. It's at that very subtle level of the activity of the mind itself. So Sabje presents the verses under three subdivisions: meaning, secondly, the example, and thirdly, the relationship of the meaning and the example. So verse 12 comes under the first, the meaning. Unruly beings are as unlimited as space. They cannot possibly all be overcome. But if I overcome thoughts of anger alone, this will be equivalent to vanquishing all foes. So I think we're familiar with Shantideva's logic here, so there's no further commentary required. Nonetheless, the meaning is astounding in its implications. As Sabje indicates, one shows anger not by attempting to conquer all one shows patience not by attempting to conquer all external enemies, a fruitless task in any case, but by the actual practice within one's own mind. So verse 13 falls under the second subheading, the example or illustration. Where would I possibly find enough leather with which to cover the surface of the earth? But wearing leather just on the soles of my shoes is equivalent to covering the earth with it. I quoted this verse last week. It is a memorable verse which epitomizes not just Shantideva's poetic skills, but his extraordinary capacity to convey a hugely significant idea in just a few words. Once heard, this verse is impossible to forget. Hopefully, we'll also recall it in future lifetimes. Remember that earlier reference, even if he forgets upon changing lives, the repeated reception and reliance on the instruction of a spiritual advisor is not a fresh undertaking, but a healing of memory. So likewise, through familiarization in this lifetime with patience, a capacity to be more naturally, or at least more at least a little more naturally patient will arise. It will not be a fresh undertaking, but a healing or a restoration of memory of what practices we had accumulated before. In other words, our capacity for patience will be continuously enhanced as we move forward. So we must start now with that rising of the inkling of the mind of disturbance. And I know in my own experience, it is possible to get a sense of that inkling in its very early wriggling stages. And it's always a forerunner, unfortunately, of a ripening delusion manifesting. And it's fascinating to consider someone who we, for whatever reasons, are regarding as unpleasant or even reprehensible in some way. And we see a person in the distance, that's okay. Then we recognize it's that person. It's already not quite okay. And then we remember that that person did that to us. And it's certainly now not okay. And then we're still looking at the person, but we're now accompanying that looking with a feeling of anger or revolt, or this impulsion to somehow push them away. And that might be manifested in something as simple as steeling ourselves and walking past them without deeming to bend sideways with a smile to say hello in the morning during our coffee break. So these are just examples. So relating the meaning and the example to each other, verse 14. Likewise, it is not possible for me to restrain the external course of things, but should I restrain this mind of mine, where would be the need to restrain all else? So Gotsamje's commentary renders the relationship explicitly, I quote, similar to the analogy, it is impossible to oppose all harmful external phenomena. Instead, one focuses one's mind on these objects and reverses the mind from generating anger. By acquainting the mind in such a way, patience is completed. Opposing all objects of anger is impossible and unnecessary. End of quote. Thus, we understand the leather analogy. Patience protects us from all objects of anger, whatever their nature and whatever their source, just as leather on our feet protects us from all sharp thorns, no matter their nature, frequency, or location. In the training anthology, Shantideva quotes from the Blessed Perfection of Wisdom in 8,000 lines in order to detail how we should strive to practice patience, not in a lofty, but in a realistic manner, allowing, of course, that patience might still somehow elude us. The quote, though I should put aside quarrels with sentient beings, all sentient beings, still I myself quarrel. If I reply as I am spoken to, that is a loss for me, not a gain. I should be a bridge for all sentient beings, but instead I say the same to you, meaning I hurl back the insult or speak harsh words to people. I shouldn't speak like that. In strife and quarrels, I should be like an inanimate object or as speechless as a sheep. When I hear the ill-said, unwelcome, ill-spoken words and speech of others, my mind should not hold on to anger. It is not appropriate. It is not suitable for me that I should think about the faults of others or believe that I should listen to talk about others' faults. Why is that? I must not disturb the aspiration by which I'll make sentient beings happy with all forms of happiness and assistance, set them free, and help them awaken fully to highest genuine full awakening. But I have malice towards them. I should have no malice towards those who create severe problems for me, nor become confused with respect to them. Instead, this is what I should do. I should act courageously with firm courage. I should not be agitated even when my life is in danger. I should never have a frowning face. End of quote. Shantideva also quotes from the Individual Liberation for Bodhisattvas. She encourages those sentient beings who are angry, gets them to trust her, helps them to endure patiently, gets along with them, and satisfies them with Dharma. End of quote. So these are all topics that are going to be extensively explored in the very famous 6th chapter on patience. So we won't dwell on them further here. Enthusiasm, guess what? Enthusiasm depends on the mind. How do we define the perfection of enthusiasm or joyous effort? Geshe Doga's definition was, joyous effort is the mind that takes joy in virtue. Shantideva first indicates how our physical and vocal activities, will prove incapable of bearing their intended results if we mentally lack enthusiasm. In other words, our lack of mental enthusiasm drains the strength of those activities and effectively makes them vulnerable and weak. This is certainly something to keep in mind when we become frustrated that our physical and verbal activities are not serving either our own aims and others. So the relevant verse reads, 15, although the development of merely a clear state of concentration can result in taking birth in Brahma's realm, physical and verbal actions cannot so result when accompanied by weak mental conduct. So taking birth in Brahma's realm due to merely a clear state of concentration is a way of indicating that diligence or mental joy is too founded on the mind. As Kunsang Pelden says, if we generate a clear, unequivocal attitude of kindness and compassion, like the loving thoughts of a mother for her only child, this state will fructify as rebirth in the Brahma realm, which is a heaven of the form realm, and in all the exalted states of bliss associated with such a mind. And he adds, thus, no matter what good deeds of body and speech we may diligently perform, this will not automatically result in rebirth in the Brahma world, because physical and verbal actions are weak in the results they give. It is the mind that is the chief criteria. In short, as Geshe-Doga also explains, that one has attained the Brahma world in this way through complete acquaintance with enthusiasm highlights how such accomplishments are dependent on the strength of the mind, namely that one is clear and strong and accompanied by the joy of practicing such a meditation. So the lines in Shantideva's text, sort of capturing this, are physical and vocal actions cannot so result when accompanied by weak mental conduct. And this is set up as an illustrative contrast. Kelsabje says, if one's actions are unrelated to such a strong mind, then one's mind is endowed with actions of body and speech, and such actions with lesser enthusiasm do not have the ability to produce a mind of the first concentration and so forth. Such a result depends upon a strong mind. In short, if one's mind lacks strength and is joyless in applying itself to practice, including one's own meditation, then one's physical and vocal activities will similarly to be found less potent. In this way, the need to have joyous effort is being highlighted, because if it's absent or weak, significant spiritual accomplishments will not be attained. Even one's own meditation practice will become wobbly, falter, and finally be found wanting. Certainly, such weak, unenthusiastic practice won't cause us to achieve a high spiritual absorption, such as a form realm absorption. So obviously, if one needs a mind endowed with joyous effort to accomplish a high realization like the first dhyana, it's clear that one needs enthusiasm in practicing other activities as well. So he's giving the example of achieving the first dhyana through joyous effort as a sort of model of the necessity of joyous perseverance in order to attain what it is we seek. In his training anthology, Shantideva excessively talks up the need to have a strong mind enthused with joyous effort. I quote, "This kind of effort fully perfects all forms of renunciation, accomplishes every action that is difficult to do, makes for all forms of patient endurance stable, stabilizes all forms of perseverance, and collects all aspects of meditative stability and wisdom. Therefore, you should be joyful." And in the Chandra Prabhadita Sutra, you should always be respectful with a delighted mind. You should always stand guard, always stand with a gentle view of things. And the Aksayamati Sutra says, "Here, what is great joy? It is a delight in recollecting the qualities of the Buddha. It is a calm and joyousness of mind, not being depressed, not being ground down, freedom from desire, giving up all thoughts of the delights of the senses, the basis of taking delight in the Dharma, joyousness of thoughts, great ease of the body, delight in the intellect, taking pleasure in rejoicing the body of a Tathagata, skill in seeking the conditions for the major and minor marks, never getting tired of hearing about wholesome states, making an earnest effort to rely on the teachings about the way things really are. Delight, calmness, and joyousness, the gladness in Dharma of the joyful, always have a mind free from enmity towards sentient beings, having sharp motivation, seeking to develop the qualities of a Buddha, and never giving up on the motivation to develop those qualities." So I've quoted this marvelous passage at some length. Shantideva quotes even more extensively. But the point is well made concerning the manifold ways in which our joyous effort is to express itself. For example, when we're speaking to others, when we're giving things away, when we encounter the words of the Buddha. In short, as the Aksayamati Sutra says, seeing the positive sides of everything. This involves investigation, I would suggest, into our own confusion. We do that joyously. Into our own sort of limits. We acknowledge those joyously. Our intention to improve our qualities, we approach that joyously. So you can see here how joy is such an incredibly precious mind. So joyous effort is not, I've got here, like some fizzing, effervescent soda drink. Rather, it is a genuinely happy state of mind that unfolds in a calm, consistent, but intensely enthusiastic, open, and delighted way. So, for example, in the sutra quote from before, there was a reference to bowing down to the spiritual teachers with respect and amazement. This invocation of awe, amazement, is fascinating to consider. All sense of ordinary restrictions and boundaries drop away, melt away in the face of our calm and radiant exhilaration. So it should be with that kind of joy that we perform a single prostration to the objects wholly of the triple gem, for example. We don't just perform it as a preliminary in order to receive a teaching or to start studying or whatever it is we're doing. We seize upon it with a mind of exhilarated joy because it is so precious and so delightful to be in contact with that virtue in that intense way at that time. And in so generating a joy of this nature, we'll be freed from the tyranny, I would suggest, of the afflictive emotions with their characteristic throwing us up and tossing us down. That's the pattern of our emotional afflictions. We're either up or we're down. Sometimes we get locked in the middle in a kind of bland, sort of frozen neutrality, which is problematic in its own way. But that pattern is repeating. Joyfulness cuts through that structure in a remarkable way. And so in a way, it's in tune, if you like, with our Buddha nature. I'll deal with the next section, verse 16, which is that meditative stabilization or concentration depends on the mind. And the verse says, the knower of reality has said that even if recitation and physical hardships are practiced for long periods of time, they'll be meaningless if the mind is distracted elsewhere. So to give a definition again, mental stabilization is a mind that in which in its own power has the ability to focus on an object of our choice for as long as one wishes. Tsongkhapa, in his great treatise on the stages of the path, defines it as follows. Mental stabilization is a virtuous, one-pointed state of mind that stays fixated on its object of meditation without distraction to other things. The Bodhisattva level says, it is the one-pointed state of mind, stabilized on virtue, and either mundane or supermundane, of bodhisattvas who have first studied and reflected on the Bodhisattva's scriptural collections. Whether it is orientated towards meditative serenity, towards insight, or towards both as the path that conjoins them, understand that this one-pointed state of mind is the Bodhisattva's meditative stabilization. End of quote. So the last is a necessary qualification because those not on a Buddhist path can also attain meditative stabilization, perfectly qualified meditative stabilization. But without renunciation, it won't lead towards escaping samsara nor overcoming the obscurations to omniscience. Technically speaking, the achievement of calm abiding is attained via a necessary systematic progression through 9 stages. And in his great treatise, Tsongkhapa details these in an exceedingly thorough way. In his meditative serenity section, which in our English translation is in volume 3, part 1, where it's presented significantly as an essential preliminary to developing special insight. This ushers in attainment of the path. Achieving concentration means that we can begin meditating on emptiness in a more powerful way. And that can eventually evolve into the special mind of special insight, upon the attainment of which will enable us to enter into the path of preparation, the second of the Bodhisattva's grounds, if you like. So that is why Tsongkhapa has placed it there. I just mentioned this as an indication of the Bodhisattva's continuing advance on the path, how it must be predicated on the attainment of shamatha, or single-pointed concentration. And this becomes obvious when we consider Tsongkhapa's presentation of three divisions of meditative stabilization. He says, meditative stabilization that stabilizes the body and mind in bliss within the present life, meditative stabilization that achieves good qualities, and meditative stabilizations that carries out the welfare of living beings. Tsongkhapa elaborates, the first meditative stabilization that stabilizes the body and mind in bliss within the present life is all meditative stabilizations that generate mental and physical pliancy when you enter them with equipoise. The second meditative stabilization that achieves good qualities is all meditative stabilizations which accomplish good qualities shared with Shravakas, the superknowledges, liberations, totalities, masteries, etc. The third meditative stabilization that carries out the welfare of living beings is meditative stabilization that accomplishes the 11 activities for others' welfare. So I'm going to just enumerate these here because it's incredibly inspiring to hear these 11 ways of benefiting others. But also we're considering here how the force to do that is greatly enhanced if it's grounded on our own achievement of meditative stabilization. First, helping those who toil and those who suffer. Secondly, helping those blind to the right methods. Thirdly, working for the sake of sentient beings by benefiting them. Fourthly, working for the sake of those threatened by danger. Fifthly, working for the sake of those afflicted with miseries. Sixthly, working for the sake of the deserted. Next, working for the sake of the homeless. Next, working for the sake of those without like-minded people. Working for the sake of those on the right path. Working for the sake of those on the wrong path. Working for the sake of all these people through miracles. And Tsongkhapa comments, we can carry out 10 of these, the exceptions being working through miracles. To summarize, this ethic, helping others, includes all the actions of our three doors motivated by the thoughts of benefiting others. Therefore, we must follow such ethics as abandoning the 10 virtues. So it's said that if one has achieved single-pointed concentration through the 9 steps, the very power of that achievement will suppress the afflictions from arising in that lifetime, from that point on. And because of that, if that being also is in contact with renunciation, they have an enormous capacity to progress on the spiritual path. So the point I think we need to make here is so obvious, but it needs to be said. Our capacity to assist others in these 11 ways depends solely upon our own mind. We can only help others by changing our own minds, transforming them, and to consider others as more important than ourselves. So I couldn't resist quoting from Lama Chopa, verse 94, since cherishing ourselves is the doorway to all torment, while cherishing our mothers the foundation of all that is good, we seek your blessings to make our core practice the yoga of exchange of self and others. So this yoga, I'm not digressing here, I'm building out this idea of the 11 ways of benefiting others, is extensively explained by Shantideva in chapter 8, starting with verse 90, which reads, first of all, I should make an effort to meditate upon the equality between self and others. I should regard all beings as I do myself, because we are all equal in wanting pleasure and not wanting pain. So returning again to the immediately pressing problem of how our mind is so easily distracted and thus barely capable of achieving the fruits of our practice, Gyaltsabje says, quoting from the Buddhist Sutras, bhikshus, austerities, prayers, and so forth that distract the mind to the desire realm do not have a result. They are shown to be meaningless because of not giving the desired result. So this paraphrases Shantideva's lines that even if recitation and physical hardships are practiced for a long period of time, they'll be meaningless if the mind is distracted elsewhere. So his point here is that if our mind, due to not having developed renunciation and not having developed concentration, is still preoccupied with the myriad intoxicating objects of the desire realm, will remain easily prone to the inroads of powerful distractions. Such distractions will mean that our recitation of mantras, engaging in austerities such as yunes, will only bear limited fruit. Indeed, they might even prove meaningless, which is to say pointless. This will be the case even if our practice is spread over a great length of time, say a 3-month retreat, or even 3 years, in a cave with only sompa to eat. If our mind is riddled with distractions, such a 3-year retreat, for example, might not be worth the equivalent of a single day combined with full concentration. Moreover, by way of stark contrast, if we have actually accomplished samadhi, we'll no longer be under the thrall of the emotional afflictions in any case. Hence, our practice will become very flexible and seemingly effortless, as there is nothing to lure our mind away. If it was to wander, we would recognize this immediately and bring it back. However, to not just suppress, but to actually actively uproot emotional afflictions requires direct realization of emptiness. And this is how we arrive at Shantideva's next verse, which is that wisdom depends on the mind. Verse 17 reads, even those who wish to find happiness and overcome misery will wander with no aim nor meaning if they do not comprehend the secret of the mind, the paramount significance of Dharma. So I'm going to leave that verse to next week because you see there's a beautiful momentum there, and I don't want to rush through the material, which is challenging. It's always challenging. What is the secret of the mind, for example? It's the emptiness of the mind that's been referred to here. What is the significance of realizing the emptiness of the mind? How is that considered a perfection, and so forth? These are vital topics to explore. So I might just give it a couple of moments break, say a 3-minute break. I'm going to leave here for 3 minutes and come back, and then we'll open it to questions and sharing of points of view. So thank you. So throw it right open. So does anyone would like to share or thoughts that have arisen during the presentation?
Hello. Yeah.
or questions? Yes, who's speaking? Sorry.
It's
Jay.
Jay.
Hi,
Jay.
Jay. How are you?
Good, really good.
You have
Okay,
to speak up a little bit. You're very, very faint for
really,
me
that's a
here.
surprise.
Yeah.
Usually people do not have trouble hearing me.
Oh.
Being in Australia, I have learned to dampen down
Oh, so
considerably.
you have to go up a bit. Yeah.
Oh God. Anyway, all right. So I'm also doing Gus Kutz's course, and it's on bodhicitta as well. It's
Mm,
the beginning one.
mm,
But he made a point yesterday that I found quite interesting, um, and certainly addressed one concern. And you've alluded to it also. It's like if we had bodhicitta, gosh golly, wouldn't it be great if we could cure all of the world's ills?
mm.
That's really hard to accept that it's mental. The other
Yes.
thing that he pointed out, I mean, that, by the way, that it's mental just seems, I don't know, I have a reaction to that. It's like, oh God, it's heavy, heavy. All right. Then the other thing is what Gus talked about, and I don't have the exact quote, but basically that a Buddha cannot, the ability or the power of a Buddha is more or less, not more or less, is equal to the world karma, so that it balances out. Could have I got that right, or am I messing that up?
I'm not quite sure I'm
That's okay.
following the point there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll clarify that and get back
Mm.
to you. Uh, Unfortunately, they don't put up their recordings as quickly as TNL does. Um, but yeah, so can you talk a little bit more about how we can accept that even though we've got the deepest kind of bodhicitta, we become a Buddha, we can't change practical problems that are in the
Well,
world?
I don't agree that that's what's
Okay,
meant here.
great.
It's saying that the perfection of that virtuous quality within our own mind can be itself perfected, brought to its ultimate expanse or reach, even though there are still beings who are hungry and so forth. And it's because we have perfected the mind and are able to perfect our mind in those 6 ways that we are then able to perfectly act for the benefit of others in ways that are inconceivable for someone who has not generated bodhicitta. So one has to say the opposite of what you're saying, that one's capacity to benefit others is most enhanced when we combine it with bodhicitta. It, but it does mean, as you're pointing out, that um, it's still up to the individual to bring about their own transformation. Because if a Buddha, through their great love and compassion, could liberate sentient beings merely by touching them with the fingers on the crown, then that is exactly the first thing they would have done. They would have brought everyone to complete enlightenment, going bonk, 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 bonk. But that cannot happen. I think that's relating back to that point you're making, Gus was making, about the balance of the karma of people and the manifestation of the Buddha. The Buddha can only work through the sentient being's own situation. They can't forcibly alter it from their own side through some sort of magical touch or elixir. That being has to transform their own mind. And this is precisely what Shantideva is talking about. If we recognize that the perfections are achieved in our mind, then we recognize that others have exactly the same potential. And how can we ripen that? We ripen it through generosity, through ethics, through patience, through joyous effort, through concentration, through wisdom. These are the actual means of performing the welfare of others. It's not abstract in this way at all, because just the act of giving, the perfection of giving, is the first perfection, because it's said to be the easiest to achieve and the easiest to practice. And so this is already incredibly exciting and challenging to consider, that just by beginning to give little things now, we are training in perfecting this mind. And we're going to do that without getting exhausted, without getting distracted, without getting impatient, without getting angry, and without misreading the reality of the situation through adherence to ignorance as well, because we're working on all these perfections at the same time. So there's a beautiful analogy given in the Lam Rim, that the Buddha's radiance and benefit is showering upon us continuously like the sun onto the earth. But if we're underneath a rock or inside a bucket, we don't have access to that light, even though the Buddha from their side are doing absolutely everything they can to benefit us. That benefit cannot reach us if we're blocked cognitively from it. So it's the challenge is for us to begin to let a sliver of that sort of Buddha nature, or that wisdom, if you like, to shine inside and start illuminating the problem that is preventing us from this transformation that's necessary. And so the Buddhas are never restricted in their means, but it is our karma, our karmic disposition from our side, that is blocking us. But we can work with that. In fact, we're the only ones who can work with that. And so it becomes an exciting challenge. Yeah.
So on a
Does that help a little bit?
pragmatic level, okay? So, you know, when I become a Buddha, you're saying that I can't do anything to, on a practical level, to, I mean, I have advantages, right? I have plenty.
No, we're not saying that. No.
Yeah. Okay, tell me about it, because I have, you know, a lot of conditions that are conducive to being able to meditate. The vast majority of and any creature, but particularly human creatures, it's obvious, do not have these advantages. And as a Buddha, why can't we, you know, improve that situation?
The
Because
Buddha's, yeah.
is that the bottom line? Their karma is outweighing our ability to interfere, or not to interfere, but to nourish them on that kind of level.
So whose ability are you referring to?
The Buddha's ability.
Oh, yes.
Buddha's ability to be able to solve starvation is countered by the people's karma. Is that what we're saying?
It's not, I think counted is a tricky word. We are in the thraldom of our own delusions, basically. And so the Buddha teaches the truth of suffering and the truth of the cause of suffering, then the truth of the path, and then true cessation is there too. So true cessation, and then how to achieve it through the truth of the path. And so it's necessary to consider all of those four noble truths as a set. And that is how the Buddha benefits and liberates us, by showing us how to place our feet on the path towards true cessation, which is every being's birthright, as His Holiness is so frequently pointing out. Everyone has this potential, this Buddha nature, but it cannot be achieved unless the person, for whatever reason, is inspired to proceed on the path. And this is where it's said that the Buddhas can miraculously benefit us. So that example we had before with the having a manifestation of a person as potentially an object of anger. also becomes, Shantideva is going to point out in the next chapter, our teacher, because we recognize the extent of our own anger when we encounter that person. And that's exactly what the Buddha's attempting to do, is point out the extent of our anger and the damage that it does. And they'll do that in all sorts of miraculous ways. So I can't speak to how those miraculous ways work, but it's said that a Buddha can manifest, and Bodhisattvas, especially Arya Bodhisattvas on the sort of the bhumis, are able to spontaneously manifest in particular ways that will be of vast benefit for us. So the practical question comes down to the instant all the time, to the moment. What is it that we do in the next moment? That's what we work with. And we're trying to look at the role of the mind in its capacity to shape how we work with those emerging moments, those circumstances. I think to sort of start thinking in sort of a global way becomes very difficult. When sometimes people ask, if the Buddha and Bodhisattvas have promised to work until all beings are enlightened, how come all beings aren't enlightened? And this is said to be one of those sort of unanswerable questions, because the karmic complexities are so vast and so intricate that we can't begin to understand them from the perspective of our limited perspective. Whereas a Buddha has omniscience, has all-knowing. They have full capacity to work out what best to do. And it might be as simple as someone giving us a lolly one day. We think, isn't that person kind? That can be seen as a manifestation of the Buddha, because it's teaching us kindness. And so whether they're actually a Buddha there or a person being kind is sort of irrelevant, because they're both doing the same work. So I think it's the inspiration that we receive, the capacity to be inspired, is coming from our Buddha nature, which is that we're primordially unblemished by the delusions. And it's because of that that the Buddhas are able to continually give us opportunities to transform in our sort of movement around circumstances as they unfold. So it's different from a theistic perspective, isn't it? Where through the power of an omnipotent being, one can rescue beings. The Buddha never claimed to be omnipotent in this way, but omniscience means that the Buddha will know exactly how to do it. And so it comes through the instructions of the Dharma. The real refuge is the Dharma, because it unfolds the path to achieving true cessations.
Okay, I've got to ponder a little bit further here because
I mean, they're great. I think these are great questions, and they're, as I said, they're very hard to answer or to resolve.
Yeah.
But the essence is to bring it back to yourself and to your current moment. What is it that I can do now?
Yeah.
That's the essential point. And then all of those other questions will fall into place over time. As I'm not speaking from my own experience, but as we become more spiritually evolved, if you like. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll conclude there. So I'll thank you very much, everyone. I'll hand over to Lou for the dedication prayers. Thank you, Lou.
You're welcome. Dedication prayers. For as long as space endures and for as long as living beings remain, and until then may I too abide, to dispel the misery of the world. May all the pains of living creatures ripen solely upon myself, And through the might of the Bodhisattva Sangha, may all beings experience happiness. May the teachings which are the sole medicine for suffering and the origin of every joy be materially supported and honored and abide for a very long time. I prostrate to Manjughosha, through whose kindness wholesome minds ensue, and I prostrate to my spiritual masters, through whose kindness I develop. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jeweled bodhicitta that has not yet arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen never diminish, but increase more and more. May my Venerable Lama's life be firm, his white divine actions spread in the 10 directions, dispelling the darkness of all beings in the 3 realms. His Holiness the Dalai Lama long life prayer, the wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech. May all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All powerful Chenrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until psychic existence is ended. Prayer for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche, peerless teacher and assembly of children and victorious ones, Shravakas, Yeka Buddhas, victorious Losang father and sons, together with the lineage, all the office of refuge of the infinite lands, please now bestow the virtue and goodness to accomplish this prayer. And holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, he wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable and noble Guru, to you I make request. Soul gate with which all benefit and happiness emerge, while striving exclusively for the welfare, victorious one's teachings and mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. At this I lost hope. Nevertheless, to the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of 3 jewels, the great waves of the mind generation of the children of the victorious ones, with a smile of a new reincarnation, swiftly beaming glory for fortunate disciples.
Thank you very much. I'll see you again.
Thank you.
Yeah, next
Goodbye,
week.
all.
Yeah.